All right, let's get right into it. We're going to talk about that feeling. You know the one. That feeling that politics is just stuck in this endless, circular blame game that never actually seems to go anywhere.
It's a question I think a lot of us are asking ourselves these days. It doesn't matter who wins the election, right? The big problems just seem to stick around. It feels like we're all watching the same movie on a loop, just with a slightly different cast every 4 years. So, what is really going on here?
Well, if you turn on the news, you're usually going to get one of two main explanations. On one side, you've got the argument that a corrupt, totally out-of-touch elite class is the root of all our problems. And then, on the other side, you've got the mirror image of that argument that no, the problem is actually an ignorant, resentful population that keeps voting against its own interests. We're going to dig into both of those claims.
So, let's kick things off with that first theory. This argument says there's a very specific class of people whose values and, frankly, whose interests are actively holding the rest of us back. But who are we talking about exactly? A critic named Catherine Liu calls them the professional-managerial class, or the PMC for short. Now, this isn't the billionaire owner class we're talking about. This is the credentialed professional layer just below them. Think about it. It's about 15 to 25% of the workforce. These are the people who staff our big institutions, universities, the media, government, and, this is crucial, they're the ones who write and administer the rules of our society.
And this is where we get to the core of Liu's argument. She says the PMC basically hijacked progressive politics. They shifted the focus away from the old left stuff, things like wages, job security, things that actually threaten corporate profits, and instead they championed a new politics that's all about cultural issues like representation and recognition. Now for big business, this shift is absolutely fantastic. It costs them almost nothing to add a few diverse faces to the boardroom as long as the fundamental, extractive business model doesn't have to change one bit.
This shift creates what Liu calls the trauma economy. And you've seen this everywhere, right? Personal essays, confessional memoirs. It's a whole system where performing your personal pain in a very specific, very articulate way can actually grant you cultural status. But here's the key. This whole system completely excludes people whose suffering is mainly economic. The plumber with a bad back, his pain just doesn't fit into that approved narrative.
This really gets to the heart of the PMC mindset. You know the word meritocracy? Well, it was actually invented back in 1958 as a joke, a satire to warn us about a dystopia where the ruling class believes it completely deserves its power, and so it feels zero obligation to anyone below them. And here's the ultimate irony. The very class that was being satirized just adopted the term as a badge of honor.
Now, you might be thinking, okay, this is some niche left-wing academic critique, but hold on, because this is where the story gets really interesting. We have a witness who corroborates this whole theory from the complete opposite side of the political aisle.
So meet Frances Widdowson. She's a Canadian academic from the populist right, and she was at this conservative conference where someone started going on about cultural Marxism in universities, and she stops him. She says, no, that's not what this is. This is a corporate initiative. It's administrators building administrative empires. She independently landed on the exact same structural diagnosis as Catherine Liu. And listen, when two analysts from opposing camps start describing the exact same pattern, that's a huge signal that the pattern is very, very real.
Okay, so we've looked at one side of the blame game. Now let's flip it over and look at the other side. This is the argument that, no, the problem isn't the elites at all, it's the voters themselves.
This idea was famously captured by that basket of deplorables comment, but it's way bigger than just one soundbite. It's an entire institutional mindset. And what it does is, it frames all this populist anger not as a legitimate response to real economic pain, but as some kind of cultural sickness, a moral failing that's all about racism and resentment. The people who are voting the wrong way are seen as the problem that needs to be managed, not a group of people who need to be listened to.
But here's the big problem with that framing. It just can't explain why this exact same populist energy is exploding all across the Western world. From Brexit in the UK, to the Yellow Vests in France, to the trucker convoy in Canada. Are we really supposed to believe that all these different working classes in all these different countries just magically developed the same cultural pathology all at the same time? Or maybe, is there something else going on? And that brings us to the big plot twist. What if both of these arguments, blaming the elites and blaming the populace, what if they're both just symptoms of a much, much deeper dynamic? Okay, this is where a really fascinating theory from a guy named Peter Turchin comes in. It's called elite overproduction. And the idea is actually pretty simple.
When a society produces way more ambitious, credentialed people than it has elite jobs available for them, you get a huge surplus of angry, frustrated would-be elites. And what do? Well, they become counter-elites. Turchin's theory gives us a totally new way to look at figures like Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. We're always told they're polar opposites, right? But if you look at them structurally, they're incredibly similar. They were both counter-elites who channeled all that popular anger to launch an insurgency against the establishment. For a lot of voters, they were just the best weapon available to throw at the system.
But here's the real kicker. Even when these populist, counter-elite movements actually win, they don't deliver. And why is that? Because once they're in power, they have to play by the exact same rules as everyone else. And the rules of our current system are designed from the ground up to reward capital and sideline labor, no matter who is sitting in the Oval Office.
So if it's not the elites and it's not the populists, what is the real problem? The answer, it turns out, might be in something we almost never talk about: the underlying architecture of the system itself.
I want you to think of it like this. All the political fighting we see every day, the culture wars, the drama between elites and populists, that's all just happening on the surface. But underneath all of that, there's a structural floor. And that floor is the economic and monetary architecture that sets the rules of the game for everybody.
So what does this architecture actually do? Well, it relentlessly, automatically rewards anyone who is close to capital, no matter which party is in power. It's designed to produce soaring asset prices for owners and at the same time stagnant wages for workers. In other words, the system itself is an engine that constantly generates the very populist anger that our politicians then claim they want to solve. It is a perfect, self-sustaining loop.
And that really is the ultimate takeaway here. The problem isn't the professional managerial class, and it's not the populists they look down on either. They are both just symptoms, products of a system whose fundamental design is set up to create these endless conflicts. You see, replacing one set of players with another doesn't change a thing, because they all end up having to play the same broken game.
So that leaves us with the real question, doesn't it? The one that cuts through all the noise of the daily blame game. If we can accept that the problem isn't the players, but the actual design of the game they're all trapped in, then the most important political question of our time becomes, how do you change the rules?